In the video today, I'm going to show you how to easily play a chromatic scale on the violin. Now for today's example, I'm just going to show you how to play a chromatic scale starting on the G string. So it's going to start on the open G, go to a very high G on the E, and it'll be 3 octave. The most important thing that I'm going to teach you today, though, is actually the chromatic pattern that will be in your left hand. So if you can learn this chromatic pattern and become really proficient at it, then you can actually apply this pattern to a ton of music that you'll come across on the violin, and it's going to make learning pieces a lot easier. So let's get to it. So first of all, here's what I'm going to show you today. So there are a lot of reasons to learn the chromatic pattern on the violin and to practice your chromatic scales. So I'd say there's probably 2 really big reasons. So number 1 is if you can become really proficient at the chromatic pattern, then it's going to make learning a lot of music, especially modern music, a lot easier. So especially if you're playing orchestra music, you have to be playing like Richard Strauss or Wagner or Bartok or Shostakovich. You know, a lot of times these pieces have a lot of chromatic sessions in them, and it can take a long time for you to learn a lot of this music at home. But if your hand already has that chromatic pattern, you know, in your hand, well, then it's going to be way easier to just apply that pattern to what's in the music, and it's going to cut your practice time way, way, way down. Okay, so the second reason why it's really, really handy to learn a chromatic pattern in your left hand or learn a chromatic scale is because you can incorporate this into your warm-up routine. So if you've watched any of my videos, you know I always stress the importance of warming up and warming up with scales because they help with your pitch, blah, blah, blah. Now, a chromatic scale is, I think, in a lot of ways, a lot harder to play than some of your diatonic scales. And, you know, it's kind of difficult to hear, you know, all the pitches, you know, because a chromatic scale is all half steps, and you've got to really, really be very precise. So if you start off your practicing by listening extremely intently to what you're doing, then it's going to help you all throughout your practice session play a lot more in tune. You know, so for example, you know, there's sometimes it's such a small difference between, like, let's say low 4th finger and like the next open string. So it's great for that. It really sharpens up your hearing. Okay, so before I go through the patterns for the 3 octave chromatic scale, I just want to explain just 2 things really quickly. So there is a difference between shifting and extending. Okay, so for the purposes of this video, I will define both of those things very clearly. So shifting means that, you know, when your hand shifts, you are moving your entire hand and you're moving all of your fingers as a unit of fingers. And that usually means that your thumb is going to be moving with your index finger. So for example, if I was to shift from to second, you see my whole hand moves. I release, I move, I press. I release, I move, I press, right? Now, an extension would mean that I stay in position and I'm merely moving my finger while in that position. So I could extend down, or I can extend up. Right? So that's an extension, and a shift would be. So they're 2 separate things. The reason why I show you that is because the pattern that I'm going to show you, for the most part, you shift going up, and for the most part, well, in a large part, you use extensions going down. Okay, so here is the basic pattern. Okay, so if you start on the open G, you just have in half position. So that means your fingers are going to be really close to that nut right here, right? In half position. So you're going to be in half position. then you're going to shift to first, then the next string, then it's the same thing. So you're repeating that pattern all the way to the E. So right? So remember, in a chromatic scale, all the distances are half steps. And in a scale, a half step is the smallest distance that you can do. Either you can do a half step or you do a whole step. Well, there's a few exceptions, but we won't talk about those. So, but you're going to do only half steps, which means that your fingers, for the most part, are going to be touching, especially when you get in the upper positions. Your fingers are going to be like on top of each other. It's going to be like, maybe depending on how big your fingers are, like my fingers, I have to like move some fingers like underneath other fingers because my fingers are so fat. But anyway, okay, so the pattern is open 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And remember to shift to first position. So shift, next string, shift, next string, shift, next string, shift. Good. Now, once you get to the E, then things change a bit. You're just going to be doing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. So, but the shifting is, more difficult. So you have some large shifts, but we'll talk about those. So there's that first big shift. Next one. Check it with your G. Right? So at the top you have a 4/4. It's a very tiny extension. It's very, very tiny because remember, the further you go up on the instrument, the smaller the distances become between your fingers. So it's going to be a very, very tiny motion. So again, it's open 1, 2, first, then shift, shift. Right? Okay, now going down, it's pretty simple. It's basically the same thing. So 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. 4, 4. Now, instead of shifting to half position, you basically are keeping your hand in that, it's basically in first position, okay? But you're going to be extending down to half, okay? Right? So, you just have to remember that going up, you're shifting to first position, open 1, 2, shift 1, 2, 3, 4. Going down, you're extending. Extend to half position, next string, extend to half position. And by the way, that fourth finger in first position is just a low 4. That's all it is. That's all it is. So you're just making sure all your fingers are touching, going down half, low 4, half, low 4. Okay, and that's about it. So I would suggest that after you get pretty good at going one finger at a time or one bow at a time, right? Then you try 2. And then 3. And then 6. And then 12. Right? You can actually do it all the way up, but all the way down. Okay? And once you get really good at it, then you can be really fast. So the whole point is that when you see the chromatic pattern in your music, right? So you see like a sea of black and a bunch of accidentals, and you're like, ah, like that, right? But then if you look at it, you're like, oh, that's a half step, that's a half step, that's a half step, that's a half step. Well, then you basically just insert this pattern in there. You figure out where it is in the pattern, and then you just play play the patterns. You just you have this pattern where it's open 1 2 1 2 3 4, and you just apply that pattern to whatever chromatic section that you have in your music. You know, so it might start on open, it might start on 1, it might start 2, but the point is that you're just keeping inside that pattern. And so it makes learning your music a lot easier. Okay, so here's just a few quick tips that'll help you out a little bit. Okay, so number one, to make sure that you're playing in tune, to test yourself, right? When you're going up, check your low 4 in first position to the open string that you have coming up. So here's what I mean. So test that with your open. Now if you play and it's like the same pitch, then you know, oh, you know, my fingers were flat. They weren't, or my fingers were sharp, you know, my fingers weren't smashed down enough. You did something wrong. So by the time you got to your 4, you know, you were too high, and then you ended up playing a G natural instead of a G flat. So test yourself on every 4th finger to make sure that whatever you did before that 4th finger was, you know, probably correct. So it would be like this. Okay. Right? So that's one way that you could test yourself to make sure that you're not going off track, that you're in tune, at least going up to that open string. Okay, so the other thing that you can do is test your G at the very top, right? So not only are you testing to make sure that you actually ended on the right pitch, but when you play your open G, it'll kind of reset, you know, your tonal center once you get to the top, and it'll help you with your pitch going down. So here's what I mean. There's what I think the G is. Let's compare that. All right, so I was pretty good, right? So, but what if I did? I don't know. Okay, now you can hear it, but okay, obviously I'm out, right? I'm flat. So I better practice that E string stuff again and be a little bit more careful. Okay, good. So I've tested myself. Okay, so as a general rule, just remember you can always use your open strings to test you. And it's not just chromatic scales, you can use it to test yourself with a lot of different stuff. Okay, so the other thing that I would just point out, that I always point out with all my scale, you know, lessons, whatever you want in my videos on scales, is that it's really important to keep your fingers down, right? So just for efficiency. So when you're going up, keep those fingers down. Don't do or some weird thing like that, right? You want to keep your fingers down. Then, so don't pick them up unless you have to. Right? And that's just, you know, it's going to give you a lot of good habits for playing the violin in general. But when you play scales, especially with this chromatic, you want to keep your fingers down until you have to pick them up. So guys, I hope this video helped. While I've got your attention, I'll mention that there's a link actually in the description for an app called TRALA. And I tried the app out not too long ago, and you know, it's pretty cool. I've tried out some apps before and wasn't particularly impressed, but this app actually is a really good practice app. It's got a lot of functionality that I can't cover now, but I tried it out. You know, the developer, they sent me a link, said, hey, why don't you check it out, let us know, you know, because it was developed by professional violinists. And anyways, if you play, it's got all these different lessons, and you can actually play, and it'll actually listen to you and correct you. So it could tell if you're playing stuff wrong. I don't know how it does it, but it can actually play. It can tell if you're playing something wrong, if you're playing out of tune, and then it'll make you play it again. So you have to play it until you get it correct. And it's got all of these lessons in there from like really remedial to, intermediate, or I don't know how far that they go, but there's a ton of lessons in there, and there's lesson logs. You can record yourself. It's got a built-in, I think, metronome and some other stuff. But anyhow, they sent us a link so you can actually get a discount. So if you click the link that's actually included in this video, it's like in the description section, you get like 60% off, I think, which is huge. So you should check it out. And and also, of course, if you guys have any questions about this video, about this scale, I know it can be confusing, and sometimes I'm not explaining things as well as I could. Just let me know. Ask me any questions in the comments below. And, you can always message me or DM me or whatever, and I get back to most people. So I hope this helps, and, have a great time practicing, guys. See you later.